Valerie, it is awesome to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited and I've got a lot to say and share with you and share with the audience. I've got some exciting news. So let's fire away.
Well, let's jump in with the exciting news. What's the exciting news?
Well, I wrote a book called Manage Like a Mother. The book is coming out October 10th and very excited about it. It's a labor of love. Took me about, a little over a year and a half, 2 years to put it together. I would put it down and come back to it. The writing process was very eye-opening. And I'm sharing a lot about my life, my experience. And it's interesting because my mom, when I grew up, my mom would always say, I wish I was 20 and I knew what I know now. And I remember hearing this and rolling my eyes. And now I'm thinking, oh boy, I wish I was 20 and I knew what I know now. And that's kind of a motivation for writing the book was, let's share what I know now and see if that can help maybe people who are at the beginning of their career or even, in the middle of their career, they're looking for solution. And I know on your podcast, this is your motivation, right? You're trying to help people find solution for their business and how they get themselves organized. So hopefully I can provide some solutions for you, for your audience.
I am sure, actually, I'm certain, just based on the conversation we've had so far, that folks will get something out of the conversation. And they may not know that that's what they wanted or needed going in, but coming out, they'll be in a much better place. One of the questions I've got just on the whole writing process, what did you learn about yourself through the writing process?
Well, if you had asked me years ago, would you ever write a book? I would have said absolutely not. And especially in English, I'm born and raised in France. So writing a book in English I would never have imagined having the patience and just the grammar to do it, being able to write properly. But, like I said, I had motivation sharing what I knew in my experience. So what I learned was that it's very exciting. It's like a cleansing experience. It's like you cleansing your brain, because when you talk to your friends or your family or people who know something about you, you have to, you can skip a couple of things because they know you and they can fill in the blanks. But when you write a book, which is going to go out to an audience who doesn't know a thing about you, you have to be very thorough when you explain something. You can't go from A to C to F. You have to hit every single A, B, C, D, E, F. So make sure that you spell it out because it all makes sense in your head. But once it's on paper, for somebody else, it may just not make any sense at all. So that was something that I've learned, is being disciplined and really writing thoroughly and methodically. The other thing I did was, when you have a lot of experiences, you tend to you want to jot everything on paper and share all your experiences, but you need a structure. So I was having witnessed my husband, Dan, writing his book, where he started from writing down all the anecdotes and all the things he dealt with at Disney during his career. And I realized how difficult it was for him afterwards to create a structure. So I thought, when I started writing, let me start with the structure, which is not the fun thing to do, but I was very disciplined about doing this. And I knew exactly the three parts of my book, how they would be organized. And then I filled in with all the fun stuff, with the stories and the actual substance of the book. But doing this really helped me. And maybe it's just me. I needed that because that's the way my brain works. But I really needed a structure. And the third thing I've learned about the book, there comes a point when you have to cut the umbilical cord and just let it go. Because you always want to go back. You reread your chapters and you're like, oh, I wish I'd said this differently, or I wish I added this, or maybe I should change this. And I kept tweaking. That's why I said it was a labor of love, because for a year and a half, sometimes we'd be busy. I would not touch the book for about a month. And then I would go back and reread something and I did not like it. So I would change it. And there came a point where the publisher said, all right, Valerie, first of all, they said, you need about 45,000 words. And I thought, I'm never going to get there. And then I got to almost 60,000. And now they're telling me, all right, you can't make the book too big because big books intimidate people and they won't want to read it. So, and that's when I went back and started tweaking things. And they came a point where the publisher said, all right, you got to stop tweaking. Just, when is the final manuscript? We just need the final manuscript. And I had to cut the umbilical cord. I said, okay, this is it. And it's a bit scary because you put it out there, you don't know how it's going to be received, and you look at it and you think, there's things I wish I could go back and improve, but that will be for the second book. So there we go.
So with cutting the cord, how'd you do it? Did you actually set a specific date where you said this is the final date, or was there something else that
November 30th last year in 22, I'm going to be done. I'm not touching the book again. And that was it. And that was the only way. And maybe because that's how that's how I function. I needed to be committed to just turning in the final manuscript. And by that date, and after that, I never touched it again.
How hard was that? Hard on December 1st?
Yes. And because you read something or you see something and another idea comes through your mind and you want to put it, you want to add it, and you're like, no, I can't do that anymore. I remember I've got a good friend of mine who's an artist, and for a while when she lived in Orlando, she had a small gallery and I would help her in a gallery, and she would take paintings off the wall and bring them back to the easel and start working at them again. And I would tell her, I said, stop doing this, put your painting, leave it, and start something else, let it go. But now, having written a book, I know exactly how she felt, that desire to be perfect and go back and change and modify and tweak. But it doesn't work that way with a book. You just gotta, let it go.
Yeah, well, it doesn't work that way with kids either. Like I remember when Sean was born, our first was born, he was born a couple weeks early. And when he was ready to come out, he was just ready to come out. It wasn't like there was this, okay, here's what the due date is. This is when he's going to show up. We're going to go in, and there wasn't a C-section involved, any of that kind of stuff. So it wasn't like we scheduled it and it happened. It just happened when it happened. And you realize how little control you have over things like that, and a lot of things.
Yeah, Mother Nature, takes over, and that's the way it's going to be. And it's the same when your kids grow up. You do everything you can, and there's a day, and I know you at that point where your kids are leaving the house, and you want to go back, you want to hold them back, and continue to educate them, or teach them some more insights, some more values, and continue to coach them and guide them. But it is what it is. There's a moment where you just need to say, okay, I've done everything I think I've done. And hopefully, they are all set to be the best human being they can be. And they got a well-rounded education. And I'll be able to add my opinion here and there once in a while. But what is done is done. That's it. You can't go back,
When you think about this, both from like your experience moving to the States and growing up in Europe, are there significant differences between that kind of evolution as a parent and that decision and that cutting off and letting go and all of those? Like how is it different in Europe versus the US, or in South America versus the US, or is it different?
I think it is different now. I don't know. Part of the difference is a cultural difference, and part of the difference is a generational difference. What I mean by that is, I think my generation, my parents were not involved in my life the way I was involved in my kids' life. My parents were not supervising me the way you feel compelled to supervise children in America. There was a lot more accountability and less helicopter parenting or snow plowing parenting in Europe. Now, things may have changed since, and that's where I say it may be cultural, it may be also generational. But generally, I think in Europe, kids are not as protected and sheltered as they are in America, and for various reasons. And one of the reasons, I think, is in Europe, cities, urban development is started centuries ago, 20 centuries ago. So cities are not as, how do you say, broken down the way they are in America. And especially, we lived in Orlando for 23 years. And Orlando is a city where you have the city center, the business center, then you have the super nice residential area, and then you have the tourist area, and then you have the not so magical side of town, but everything is very separated, which is something you don't find in Europe. So I think as a result, in Europe, the social classes and the diversity is more present. It's omnipresent. It's something you see all the time. In fact, in the book, there's a story I tell, which for me was eye-opening. I took my kids to France when I stopped working for a while to really focus on raising them. We went to France with the kids, and at the supermarket in France, when you get your cart, you put a coin in there, you put a euro to get your cart, and then you have to bring your cart back so you can retrieve your euro. So that's how they make sure that the carts are not left around the parking lot. And typically, there's a lot of panhandlers in that area because they know that you're going to walk past them with a euro in your hand, and therefore there's a high probability you're going to give them some money. And I remember Julian, our oldest son, was 7 years old at the time, and he said, "Mom, what are these people doing?" And I explained, I said, well, they're asking for money. He said, why would they do that? And I said, well, because they don't have a house, probably sleep outside, and they can't afford food. And that's how they try to survive. And he looked at me, and 7-year-old little Julian said, we don't have people like this in America. And when I heard this, I was floored. And I remember calling Dan and said, we have a problem. Because we were living in a really nice residential area, not too far from Walt Disney World. Magic Kingdom was our kids' backyard, They we vacation in nice places, and the kids went to this real nice school, and everything I felt was so sheltered. I was afraid that we were raising kids who were totally assuming that the rest of the world was living like them. And it took us a little while until we actually moved away from Walt Disney World, and we actually moved downtown Orlando in College Park, which is the oldest neighborhood of Orlando, where you have a lot more diversity. And I was really happy. First of all, our neighbors were different age group, different generation. After 14 years in Orlando, here we are for the first time. I actually met somebody who was born and raised in Orlando, our neighbor. He was 85 years old, and he had gone to Edgewater High. He had been there all his life. He had been there before Disney, before Universal, any of that happened. And I thought that was so refreshing, because that's what I was used to in Europe. And I wanted my kids to experience this, because my fear was we were going to, raise children that were totally sheltered from the rest of the world. And I knew that it would not serve them well. I knew that one day they would have to face reality, which is, there are people struggling in America like they are in Europe and everywhere else in the world. And I wanted them to be aware of this and realize that. So that was a big, so I think in Europe, you exposed to this as a kid a lot more than you are in America. And it's one of the danger of this country. Now, I'm sure if you were to live in New York or LA or some of the bigger city, there may be more of an overlap. But I thought Orlando, for one, was a city where you could live in a bubble. And I think we can't afford to do that nowadays. We got to see what's out there.
Why do we as parents struggle with that piece? Because it makes sense when you talk about it. Like, it makes sense to create this opportunity for kids to get out and see different things and experience different things and realize what is reality. Why do we struggle with creating those experiences and that exposure?
Because part of you as a parent and as a mother, you want to keep your kids safe. You want them to be safe. So what part of you wants you to be sheltered, but the other part of you wants them to learn about the world and learn what they have and what they don't have, and what the possibilities are, and what the opportunities that are available to them. So it's that constant fight between, it's like if your teenager says, all right, Dad, I'm going to take my backpack and travel around the world. Part of you will be like, wow, so exciting. I'm so happy for you. I wish I could do that too. And the other half of you is going to go like, I am terrified. What if something happens to my child, So, and that's, again, something that I think takes discipline and saying that, you know what, there's a moment where you got to let go and say, fine, go out there and see the world. And there will be ups and downs. You're going to learn some valuable lessons in the process, and you keep your fingers crossed and hope that nothing bad's going to happen to them. And whatever happens to them, they can overcome and they can learn something in the process.
One of the stories that you share in the book that really that jumped out at me is the satisfaction of creating something without guidance, and that was in the context of Margot and her friend putting
Salad.
together a salad. So share a little bit about that. Share that story if you would.
Yeah, I think there was 6 and 7, something like this. And
Yeah.
those two girls, our little neighbor, Tara, was playing with Margot, and they came into the kitchen and said, Mom, my daughter said, Mom, we want to cook. And I'm like, okay, but we want to make a salad. I said, fine. I said, whatever you get out of the fridge or in the pantry, just go for it. And they assembled the most ghastly salad that I could think of. I mean, they literally grabbed whatever. I mean, it went with chocolate sauce and cayenne pepper and, whatever, strawberries and green fields and carrots. And, some of it, when it started, I was like, oh, that actually looks interesting. But what they ended up putting in there, all kinds of stuff. And I thought to myself, don't get involved, don't say anything, let them experience it. And I mainly was entertained and curious to see what they would say, because I'm like, there's no way they're going to be able to eat that. But you know what? They did. And they just said, oh, I said, how was your salad? It was great. It was great. And I'm like, you know what? Good for them. Now, I'm sure that they learned a lesson in there, because some of these ingredients they put together were really not meant to go together. But yeah, I could tell they were just so happy. Those two little girls, just thrilled. They had made their own lunch, and they had been able to do it on their own, unsupervised. I did not get involved. And I was like, you know what? Every so often, you need to let your kids do that and go crazy and do something out of the ordinary, but they can do independently. Let them learn independently. I think that's the thing.
Why do we struggle as leaders inside businesses to provide this same kind of creative space for our teams to do this?
Because very often we focused on productivity. It's a waste of time. It's the thing, and that's how we feel, because that learning is not something, there's no KPI associated with that, right? It's not something substantial. It's like investing in relationship. It's not something you can touch, or that's very tangible, and it doesn't directly equate with money in the bank, or more clients, or better service, or you don't always connect the dots. And often it's a long-term investment. It's like training is a long-term investment. Some of it will be effective right away, some of it may filter out 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. And it's hard sometimes to connect the dots. And meanwhile, we have all the other things that, we want to make money. We want to address the needs of our guests or our clients. And we want to make sure that we're productive. So all that tends to supersede those valuable lessons that you need to teach your kids, or you need to teach your employees. And they may not pay off for quite a while, but having the discipline to commit to that and say, I'm going to let my team members have one day when they can do anything. And I talk about that in the book. I talk about having a hack day where people can work on anything with any partner in the organization, preferably somebody they don't usually partner with, and see what comes out of that. And even if nothing of substance comes out of it, the relationship that is formed in the process, the learning that happens in that process, that is valuable. That's a long-term investment, but you can't, put your finger on it. That's why we shy away from this kind of thing.
It's funny. It seems like organizations talk about the challenge of silos being built inside those organizations, and the lack of cross-team collaboration inside organizations, and some of the culture challenges inside organizations. Yet they'll talk about that as being a challenge, but they won't invest the time, energy, and resource to create opportunity for people to work together in this kind of hackathon or hack day type environment. Why does that happen? Like, it seems obvious, but it doesn't happen. Why does this occur?
Because it's comfortable to stay in your silo.
Mm.
First of all, it's very comfortable. It's safe. You do your job with your own priorities, and sometimes you totally ignore what's going on next to you, and because you ignore it, you don't know the value that you can bring to each other. And I think that's one of the big difference. One of the story I give in the book, and when I worked at Disney, I was at a job when I was in charge of assortment planning for Epcot. On one hand, I had the entire merchandise operation for the park. So we had about, at the time, there was about 72 point of sales at Epcot. And on the other hand, there was the buying office, which was about 5 miles away from the park. And the buyers were buying stuff, sending it, it was shipped over to the stores. And both sides, the operators like the buyers, had their frustration, and it was always, pointing fingers at each other. And I remember one of the incidents I talk about, there's a chocolate egg that they sell in Germany that is a very, very famous, it's called Kinder eggs, and they sell them now in America, but for the longest time, they did not pass the test in America, because in that chocolate egg, there was a little yellow plastic container that would hold a little toy. And when we put it through the testing, they were afraid that kids would bite into that soft plastic egg to get to the toy, and they could choke on it. So it was not allowed in the US. But nobody ever communicated that to the operators. So the operators who worked in the German pavilion would get every day many, many requests from guests. Oh, do you sell the Kinder eggs? And they would say, no, we don't. But they didn't know why. So their frustration grew. And, messages were just, that communication just never got to the buyer. The buyer for the German pavilion did not realize the extent of the guest request and would brush it aside like, oh, that's not significant. I have a million other things more important to do, not realizing that it wasn't even about the money from the sales. It was about the frustration that was in the German pavilion from the operators, not understanding why aren't the buyers buying this Kinder egg? This is something we go to Germany, you can buy at any store. Until one day I went from the operators, talked to the buyer, and the buyer said, no, it doesn't pass the test. We can't bring it in. Boom, that's it. Here's your answer. It took me a minute to get it, about as much time to share it with the operators. And the goodwill that story brought me was incredible. Just because a silly little thing like this. So beyond the actual money impact, it was about, creating that bridge, looking over the wall, what's going on the other side? Why are they doing this way? Why aren't they, partnering with us? What do they know that I need to know that's going to make my life easier? Those are all the kinds of questions that people should ask. When you're in your little silo, go and investigate what's going next door. You don't know. One day, this may come real handy. This may be something that helps you out. You don't know. And you don't know what you don't know. That's what it comes down to. And I think that's where there's value in educating yourself about the people that work below you, above you, aside you, and incorporate what they do and the knowledge they have and the skills they have. Life is, work is very complicated today, much more so than it was 20 years ago when I started working, and 30 years ago, I should say. And I think now there's so much pressure. It's really intense. The only way things change so fast with globalization, with technology, with climate change, with competition, with legislation, everything changes so fast. The only way to survive is by having other people bring their expertise and their perspective to the table. So why not go and engage right away and forge that relationship and leverage that? It doesn't make any sense for me when, that people stay in this close mindset, and not trying to learn from others.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, we talk about wanting to be more creative or innovative in the work that we do or in the things that we deliver to organizations, but then we don't create opportunities for people to work together and do some of the job shadowing. Would you was job shadowing something that you saw or that you've seen or have used in the work that you've done to help bridge that gap?
Yes, and that's something, having worked many years for the Disney company, that's
Yeah.
something Disney did. I suppose they still do this, but encouraging job shadowing, reaching out to people, find out, especially in a company like Disney that offers so many different jobs within one organization. You've got
Yeah.
people who dance, you've got IT, HR, you have horticulture, you've got animal, people who work with the animal. I mean, you've got every single job, you've got the cruise line, everything. So why not go and see what's out there? What's interesting to me is very few people, I think I only know one person who is able to say, when I was 10 years old, this is what I wanted to do when I grew up, and that's what I'm doing today. The vast majority of people, they fall into a job because suddenly they met somebody else or they got an experience that triggered a learning and they were like, oh, I actually enjoy this and I'm good at this, and it became a career.
Yeah.
But seldom do you hear somebody says, I was 10 years old, I had a calling, I knew that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. So why not expand your horizon, go out there, and especially young people, when they said, what should I do? Would you have any advice for my career? And I tell you, all three cockerels, whether it is my husband, my father-in-law, myself, we're always the first one to say, just get experience. Doesn't matter if it's not exactly what you want, or even if it's totally remote, from what you want. I remember our three kids, they worked in horticulture at Disney,
Okay.
and weeding and mulching from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day in July and August. And we insisted that they do this for all kinds of good reasons. And I remember all three of them, they were not exactly thrilled, but we like, this is going to be a great experience for you. Some 3 or 4 years later, I remember Margot, our daughter, she said, I was filling up my resume and I realized how much I have done. And I said, I don't know, it's really long. It's much longer than my friends. I said, yeah, because you always had a summer job or you always volunteered for an organization, and that gave you a whole bunch of experience. So she said, well, it doesn't fit on my resume. I don't know if I may have to remove some stuff, maybe that horticulture thing. And I said, Margot, if you can tell an employer that you were able to show up at 6 a.m. every morning in July and August in Florida and work weeding and mulching when it's 95 degrees out there and 95-degree humidity, it says a lot about your character. And she ended up living it there. And she said, yeah, I never thought about it this way. But I think now that they're young professional, they see the value in it. They did not at the time, to be honest with you. They were not excited about the job, but they did it. And it was a great learning.
So as a leader, how do you balance that piece of, look, I want my kids or I want people on my team to get all of those experiences. And at the same time, I want them to feel safe and protected and like they understand fit inside there, and just kind of balance the piece of, hey, I want them to get experience and learn on their own, but I also need to guide them a bit as they go through the process and kind of nudge forward.
Well, it depends at what level they are. I think
Yeah.
young people early on in their career, just get as much experience as you can. Go, in different, even in industries you did not anticipate to get into, and go and talk to people at all different levels of organization. And everybody matters, by the way, in the organization. So don't think that because you're talking to somebody who's a frontline, you're not going to learn something. There will be some nuggets of knowledge there that you can learn from. And that tool you're going to put in your toolbox, and maybe you're going to pull it out 6 months from now, maybe 6 years from now, maybe 15 years from now. And suddenly that, oh yeah, I've done this. So I talked to somebody, I spent some time with a guy who did this, or I know somebody who works in that industry and maybe they have some pointers for me or some knowledge. There's value in all of this. So I think, I don't know, I wouldn't be so worried about safety when it comes to that.
Yeah.
As they move up within a career, I would say then maybe you can give a little bit more guidance, more coaching on where you should go, and maybe some lateral move that would be of value to them that I would recommend. But otherwise, for me, the world is your oyster. Just go out there and see what's out there. And you may come across, you may have one job today and you may realize tomorrow that, hey, this is something I have never considered doing, and I'm actually enjoying doing it. I'll tell you from my own experience. I worked for Disney for a year. I had a 1-year visa. I went back to France, and at the time, I thought I wanted to be an investment advisor. I worked for a bank for 3 years, and I thought that was going to be my career. I wanted to work on the stock market. Ultimately, I had this vision. And then Disney, after 3 years, Disney called me back and offered me a job to open Disneyland Paris. And I worked in the retail division. I started running a merchandise shop. I never thought 1 minute that this would be my career. Merchandise was not something I even considered. But I did that for a while and then moved on to assortment planning. So that's when I started working closely with the buying office. And I really enjoyed that job. And then we moved to the US, and I stayed within retail for a while. And then I stopped working. And then something funny happened. And if you had told me one day you're going to do public speaking, I would have said, absolutely not. I hate it. I don't like it. I don't want to do this. But one day I got a call Dan got a call from Disney Institute, because they had a group of insurance company from Canada was coming to Walt Disney World, and they were doing a program for them. And out of those 600 people, they realized 100 of them only spoke French. And the one thing that Disney Institute does or did at the time was to make sure that people who facilitate the program, they're not professional facilitators. They were actually leaders. So you could talk from experience. You can't just go as a facilitator and work at Disney Institute. You have to work within the company and gain some leadership experience before you can facilitate those programs, which I think is a really smart way to do it. So at that point, Disney Institute found themselves, they needed somebody who had leadership experience at Disney and who spoke French. And they thought of me. So they called Dan and said, can we talk to Valerie? And they called me one day. They said, could you help us out? We really need somebody who speaks French. Do you think you could facilitate this program? I'm like, okay, fine. I'll do that. That's that one-off, right? And I did it. And after that experience, I remember the director of Disney Institute said, did you have fun? I said, yeah, actually, that was fun. He said, would you like to do this? And that's how I ended up working for Disney Institute. But that was not in the plan. And I kind of fell into it. So why not? I've experienced this. It has been it's brought some great opportunities to me. And I hope people will see that and just say yes. Dan always says this, just say yes. Let me try it. Why not? And then you discover something you like doing. So it's wonderful.
I think the just say yes is really powerful, because you don't really gain experience from reading a book. You gain experience from applying the things that you might get some ideas from the book on what you want to apply and test and determine if those things work or if they work for you. Just say yes, get out there and do things. Let's talk a bit about the speaking that you're doing now. What's it like working with Dan on a stage together, going out and sharing and helping others as a team? What's that experience been like?
So first question, what is the probability that Dan will listen to this program? I'm just kidding.
I would say very low. Dan, you can just shut this off right now, Dan. There's nothing else will happen from this point on.
Well, this is, again, not something we had planned.
Yeah.
This is gradually, I was not involved with Cockerell Consulting when this started. Dan started very much on his own. And then he wrote his book, and I helped him through that process, which was a great learning. Both of us learned a lot through that. And then he got requests to do workshops. And that's when I started helping him a little bit. And then we started doing workshops together. And then now, just very recently, primarily because of my book, I'm starting to do keynote speaking, which once again is not something I wanted to do, but I started and I'm like, well, actually, it's not that bad and it's fun. And it's actually, we've started doing speech and keynotes together. And we just did a couple in Brazil and we thoroughly enjoyed it. First, it's a lot easier when there's two of you on stage. Especially, we like to finish the keynote with Q&As. And when there's two of you thinking on your feet, it's a lot easier. Two heads are better than one, right? So we really enjoy this, and we have different skills and we have different talents. And I think I learned a lot about my husband in the process. He learned a lot about me in the process because we work very differently. And somehow we still married. So I guess we're doing pretty well. We have our moments, there's days when Dan says, okay, I'm going to Starbucks and I'm going to be there for most of the day today. Or sometimes I tell him it is time you go to Starbucks, because right now, if we stay in the same room, it's not going to be pretty. But we have a really good relationship, obviously, and we can overcome this. And we do I think the one aspect about working together that is somewhat dangerous is we are not very good at putting limitation to this is when we work and this is when we play. And I'll give you an example. Yesterday was a beautiful day here in Colorado, and we had an open afternoon, and we decided let's go and hike and take advantage of the mountain, which is literally 5 minutes away. And we're hiking, and here we are talking about work. And there's a moment we actually stopped, and I said, Dan, look at the mountain. Isn't it beautiful? But that's one of the problem we're facing, is saying, okay, today is Sunday and we're not going to talk about work all day. We are not good at doing this, and that's something that we have to change. But it's been great, learning about Dan and see what he does best. And we found over time, we found what I do and what he does. There's still a huge chunk of things that I know you were part of his community. I never got involved with the community. That was his baby. And I think he needs that, and I need my own thing also. So it's been fun.
So how do you build those barriers, those blocks, to keep this is the work time and this is the playtime? Because I struggle with that, and it drives Jen nuts, because as soon as we have a little bit of time in the car, I go straight into the list of stuff that I've got in my head that we still have to work through, whether it's related to the kids or it's related to work, and how some of those are actually kind of coming together. So what are some controls that do you have controls that you put in place to help hold both of yourselves accountable to this?
No, I tell you one thing we do, and it's kind of silly. It's going to make you laugh, but we try to have lunch together. Well, first, he works in his office most of the time, and I work downstairs. We have a 2-floor apartment, so at least we're not sitting next to each other. And then we try to have lunch together, and we realized that over lunch we would keep talking about work. So now we play gin. We we have lunch and we play cards. Yeah. Because while we do this, we not talk, we're focusing on this, and it takes about 20 minutes, half hour, but for 20 minutes, half hour, that's it. We've disconnected. The one thing we really, both of us are really good at, is working out. We work out every day, almost every day. So there's a moment where I'm going to grab my iPad and go to the gym, or he's going to go run, or we try to do that. So this is a moment where we can regroup and take care of ourselves, But I'm not sure we are the best people to give advice on this, because we're guilty of, especially when we travel, we tend to be go, go, go. We try to optimize our time. We travel extensively. And when we're out there, we try to optimize the time we are there, and we try to bring as much value to the client as possible. And it ends up, we come out totally exhausted. So we were just recently in Brazil for about 4 weeks, and it was then did three different flights within Brazil, and we hit Rio and Sao Paulo and Teresópolis together. So it was a lot of go, go, go. And the last weekend we were there, we took 2 days and we went hiking in the forest over there. Just, look at the birds, look at the trees, appreciate the landscape, and not get away from work. So
really like the idea of playing cards, or having some kind of a game that's going on. So that's something. If Jen, if you're listening, that's what we're gonna go ahead and implement that, and see if that helps. And usually it's me, so that's the problem. Is I'm the one who ends up bringing it up or pushing those things through. When we were talking earlier, you talked about the inspiration of the book, which is this whole idea of, if I only knew now, or knew then what I know now.
Yeah, I mean, when I became a leader when I think I was 24, 25. And I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, literally, I thought I probably, it was interesting because once I was at Disneyland Paris and I was area manager of what is called Festival Disney, which is a much smaller version of Disney Springs, right?
Okay.
So I had about 6 retail locations at the time that I was overseeing. So I had about, I would say, 10 guest service manager, entry level managers reporting to me. And I remember thinking that in my head, I thought I was actually doing pretty good. If I had to self-rate myself, I would have thought, nah, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm here, I'm supportive. And we had a 360-degree evaluation.
Okay.
And I remember opening the envelope and it came as a shock. And here's what I learned. I learned the first thing was I was involved in everything. I was the try to, get involved in the scheduling, in everything. And my team felt that I was not trusting them. I wasn't trusting them. I was micromanaging. That was the first thing. The other thing is I had a million ideas of things I wanted to change and implement. And therefore, I was always go, go, go. We need to start this. We're going to sell cotton candy. And here we're going to do this. And we're going to start selling balloons. And we're going to do a merchandise cart at the entrance of the parking lot. And we're going to do, I had an idea a minute, but I had so many ideas that my team didn't know where are the priorities, what matters most. There was just a whole bunch of ideas, but not much strategy behind it. And then the third thing that happened that I've remembered, and I try to remember all my life, is people said in the 360 feedback, they said, Valerie does not respect balance. And I thought to myself, why would they say this? Because I never prevented anybody from, it's time to go home, go home. But when your boss stays at work until 8 p.m. every day, is the first one there in the morning, the last one there, people tend to do the same thing because they think that your expectation as the leader is that that's the amount of work you should commit to the workplace. And if you want to move up in the organization, you need to do what she's doing. And even though I had never articulated that and said to people, all right, I expect you to be here first thing in the morning and stay until 8 p.m., but I had never, practiced what I never even preached it, and I never practiced what I preach. And there was no communication on that. And people assumed by watching me being there 12, 13 hours a day, that my expectation was for them to do the same thing. So that was really interesting. I learned a lot in the process, but to tell you, I had a chip on my shoulder. I really thought I was like a great leader. Turns out it wasn't the case. So like I said, I didn't have a clue what I was doing back then. And don't even get me started on time management. Until I joined the Cockerell family, I was just a lost cause. And until I met Lee Cockerell, and he set me straight. So anyway.
So you're set straight now? Now everything is just right? Everything
Way
in?
more organized, more organized than I would have been before. I think it came as a shocker when we moved to the US and we live very closely to my in-laws. And I remember Lee one day needed the ride to the airport. And I said, I'll drive you to the airport. I said, what time should I pick you up? And he said, 7:06. I'm like, what? Who says that? Usually you say between 7 and 7:15, right? No, 7:06. I'm like, okay. But no, we've, obviously I have the best father-in-law I could hope for. So, but I've learned a lot from him and the importance of getting organized, spending time planning and preparing for things, not waiting for the last minute. The Eisenhower matrix, I would totally live in the urgent, important box. I would never get out of there. That was me. And I've learned to be more proactive with my time and also take care of the stuff I don't like first thing in the morning. I did that when I was a stay-at-home mom. The first thing I would do in the morning was put a load of laundry because I hated doing the laundry. So I'm like, get out of bed, get the washing machine going. That was always my thing. So now I can go about my day not having this thing dangling over my head,
So as a lot of the stuff that we're talking about all seems pretty, they're basic skills that we learn through life over time, through those experiences. And sometimes it seems like we forget that the stuff that happens in life also applies to work, and the stuff that happens in work applies to life. Why do we create this disconnect? Why do we Or do you think people create a disconnect and try to be different in work and in life and in self?
Well, that if that's the case, then you have a problem, right?
Yeah.
If you can't be yourself at work, you're probably in the wrong environment. I can't imagine having a job where you have to put on a show every day, or a facade, or pretend to be something you're not, or defending values or ideas that you don't really believe in. So that in itself, I mean, we can park that to the side for now, but I think it's a huge issue if that's how you plan to operate, and I don't expect you being happy with that, and I don't expect you to be successful with that. So that's one thing. I think generally, and that's probably one of the motivation also that helped, that something behind the book was that I think we tend to look for solutions, complicated solutions, when the solutions sometimes are very basic. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an analogy that I use all the time. I played tennis for many, many years. And when my tennis game would be off, meaning the ball would not land where I wanted it to land, and I was getting frustrated, I would always say, okay, Valerie, go back to basics. Bend your knees, keep your eyes on the ball, follow through, which is the first things you learn when you learn how to play tennis. So I would do that for, 4 or 5 rallies, 10 rallies if I had to. Bend your knees, keep your eyes on the ball, follow through. And if I did that long enough, eventually my game would come back. And then I would start playing my shots and hitting my shots, right? I think when in leadership is the exact same thing. Our heads are spinning. There's tons of books, TED Talk, podcasts and such talking about leadership out there. Some very sophisticated ideas, very complicated ideas. For me, what works is let's take care of basic things. If you go back to basic and you train people properly, you set great expectation, you train them properly, you build relationship, you trust them, you empower them, you give them feedback, you give them encouragement, you communicate well, you collaborate, you do problem solving together. Those are the basic things. If you take those basic things and you can do all that effectively, I don't think you have much of a problem. I mean, there may be, things like more strategic, but all of that will already iron out a lot of the problems that you may be dealing with. So let's go back to basic. Let's do those simple things effectively, and don't confuse simple with easy. You have to be consistent. You have to be fair. You have to be patient, much like raising your kids, by the way. You have to be patient. You have to be consistent. It's a long-term commitment. It's often not, you get no compensation for raising your kids. And that's, you are compensating for being a leader. But here's the thing. People think that some people want to be leaders because they think leaders are not beholden to anybody. And I beg to differ. I think leaders are beholden to everybody. And much like a mother. And when I say mother, by the way, that's one of the things I want to make sure that I say. This book is not exclusively for mothers. It's not exclusively for women. It's also for men. And I just call it Manage Like a Mother because the reality, even though it is changing today for the better, but the reality is that most of us have been raised not exclusively, but primarily by our mothers, right?
Yeah.
So a mother's job is the same thing. You have to take care of all those basic things and with consistency, and you beholden to your spouse, to your kids, and the proof of that, when mom is sick, the whole family dynamic falls apart, right? The fridge is empty, the kids don't get picked up from school. I mean, there's a lot of logistic issues that happen. A mother feels beholden to every member of the family. A leader is beholden to every single member of his organization. And to think that because you're a leader, you don't need to worry about the others. No, it's quite the opposite. You have this idea of servant leadership. That's one of the things at Disney that I enjoyed for the most part, is that leaders, when you talk to them, they will tell you, my team doesn't work for me. I work for my team. I'm here to give them the resources, the training, and the everything they need so they can do their job.
I think the powerful connection between the leadership and management stories of a parent and seeing it both through the eyes of a parent and through the eyes of watching their kids grow up, and through in the context of being able to operate inside a high performing work environment that's very, in a lot of cases, is very large, but then operates in the context of small teams inside the organization, and pulling that together into a book like the one that you've or have out there is really, really powerful. And what I like about it are the simple stories that people can relate to, and that, you know, we can go through and we can look at language. We can think about the food that people want to make, like the salad, or the questions that come up, or even kind of the observations that come into place because we live in this bubble, and we're just like, well, we don't see that thing around here. Break the bubbles, get out there, do some of the job shadowing. So very, very powerful. Valerie, where can people find the book? Where do you want to send people?
It is on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, or your favorite bookstores. It will be available. It's already available for pre-sale, but it will be available as of October 10th. And I'm very excited about it. And you know, we have all kinds of resources. I'm compiling resources to put on our website right now. Actually, one of the things I'm doing, and I would love for you to contribute to this. I'm starting a Manage Like a Mother project, and the idea is for people to think about what they have learned from their mom that they use in work today. And I'm gonna share a quick story about my mom, so you understand what I'm looking for. But the idea is, there is one thing that your mom did that has stayed with you, and you think about it whenever you're confronted with a challenge or a roadblock or whatever. And here's the story. My mom's name is Anna. She was born in 1932 in France, and she never drove her entire life.
Wow.
And in 2002, my dad passed away, and mom found herself not only grieving but living in a small town without public transportation. And now she has no way getting to where she needs to be. So she has to rely on my sister or neighbors or relatives to drive her around. And mom's always been, growing up, she was born in 1932. So she grew up during World War II. Times was tough and everything. So she's not the kind of person who's going to sit and feel sorry for herself. So it took her several months, after my dad passed away. And then one day she called me and she said, "You'll never guess what I did." I said, "What did you do?" She said, "I bought myself an automatic car because it's easier to drive than a stick shift. And I signed up at driving school." My mom was 72 years old.
Wow.
And she went and learned how to drive. Today, she's 91 and she still drives. Now, she doesn't go anywhere crazy, right? She doesn't go to the big city. She doesn't go on the highway, but she gets to the hairdresser, to the grocery stores, to wherever she needs to go. And every time I'm fighting it with technology, and I'm getting frustrated because of all the things that, the social media, and then the tech of, I don't know, anything that is social media related. And I get frustrated, and I remind myself, I said, if my mother can learn how to drive at 72-year old, I ought to be able to learn how to do this. And that's my lesson. This is what I've learned from my mom. So I am looking for similar stories and compiling those stories, because what I'm hoping is to open a conversation here, thinking about first appreciating your mom for what she's taught you. And by the way, moms are not perfect, right? They sometimes very good at one thing, not so good at another thing. But by virtue of being a child, you've been on the receiving end, on the receiving end of mothering. So you've learned exactly what's the right way and what's the wrong way. When your mom was being fair, or she was being supportive, or she was giving you good advice or good guidance, or teaching you something of value. That now. You probably also remember those times, particularly when you're a teenager, when you feel your mother is not being fair, not treating you well, keeping you accountable, and it's not fair because she hasn't set the right expectation, this kind of thing. So you also remember that. Take all that learning as a leader. Take all of that, remember it, think about it, and then apply that to your, in your role as a leader. Apply that with your team members. Use that to remind you of what a great leader should do. they should set expectation properly. They should encourage. They should give feedback every day. Moms, don't wait for your performance evaluation at the end of the year to tell you you're not going to get any toys at Christmas because you did not behave this year. No, they tell you right away with no uncertain terms what you're doing wrong. But they still love you, right? They're just trying to change your behavior. So there's so many learnings here that you've learned what works and what doesn't. So leverage that. And by collecting those stories or inviting people to do some introspection and think about this, I'm hoping that they can really think about, oh, this is a great learning, and this is of value to me every day when I work. And I just want all these stories put together, and so that people can, hopefully when they read my book, every chapter starts with a story, something that happened with my own kids. But I'm hoping people can substitute their own, they can put in their own stories and extract the same learnings.
But I didn't realize that this was the origin of the quotes that are in the book until we talked about it just before hitting record. But you collected quotes from people around the world to share a lesson or something learned. Can you share a little bit about what you've learned from all of those quotes that you collected?
Yeah, it was actually, that was the origin of this Manage Like a Mother project. The initiative was just to see, well, I wonder what mothers around the world tell their kids. What is that one thing that they would say all the time? And I was surprised that about 50 people gave me quotes, and I got quotes from Brazil, Japan, Morocco, all over the place. And in the end, I learned, well, the first thing is that mothers, doesn't matter where you're from, your culture, your background, all the mothers around the world want to do the same thing for their kids. They want them to be safe, and they want them to be happy, and they want to have even a better life than they have themselves. That's the same ambition everywhere. And then the quotes that came back some of them were super funny, some were classic things, and some were really profound, which say something about the culture of the person. But that gave me the idea of, try to understand and appreciate what moms do and contribute around the world. And again, how this learning, we have it deep inside and we use it every day. We don't always appreciate it. That's why on the last page of the book, I said, if you haven't done so, thank your mom for what she's taught you, not only for your, the person you are and you've become, but also for the lessons that she's passed on, the good lessons and the bad lessons, but you've learned a lot about leadership in the process, even unbeknownst to you often. But
I think the cool thing that's coming up in all of this is the legacy that can carry on from the wisdom of moms and these stories that you're sharing and the quotes that you're sharing. Because some folks lose their moms early in life, or a little bit earlier than others. Unfortunately, my mom is still around. Jen's mom is not. Jen's mom passed away from breast cancer 13 years ago. And we were just talking about her earlier today. We've got these Lenox teacups that are from back when we registered for the wedding, and just all this Lenox china type stuff that does not get used. Like, we're paper plates at Thanksgiving. And I said the best use of one of these teacups would be to give it to some of the girls in the neighborhood so that they could have their tea party, because they would make use of it. I said, your mom is rolling around in her grave right now, hearing me say these things out loud. And but there's this legacy that occurs, or that happens as a result of being around some great moms and some not so great moms, and some great moms who are running into turmoil. So Valerie, thanks for sharing your stories in the book. Where would you like people to connect with you?
Well, they can reach out to me at Cockerell Consulting. We'll put the link in the email address in the show notes. I love engaging with people. I love to hear comments, suggestions, questions regarding the book, or anything else for that matter. I'm only a phone call or email away. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram, though Instagram, we it's funny, this is something I'm not too good at. When we started working in Brazil, it's huge in Brazil. This is how people operate, all the businesses. And when we first got there, people said, do you have an Instagram account? I'm like, let me see. I'm not sure. I say, oh, yes, I do have one. They say, how many followers do you have? I'm like, 12. People like, really? So it's growing now. It's primarily directed to our Brazilian clientele, but I am out there and you can reach out to me. LinkedIn, I'm not great at Facebook. I'm on WhatsApp also. Great way to reach us out. And either me or Dan, for that matter, just we love people. We literally love people and talking and learning. And that's the beauty of what we do now is we share a lot, but we learn just as much. And that's why we enjoy it so much.
And that's why I enjoy the conversations that I get to have with Dan. I've enjoyed this conversation with you. It is clear that you've adopted a continuous learning approach, and this ongoing reinforcing the importance of learning through experience, testing things, trying things, figuring out what you like, and doing more of those things. And if you don't like it, figuring out ways to get other people to do those things. If you know of somebody who would enjoy this conversation, please share it with them. Let Valerie and I know via LinkedIn or Instagram. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?